Welcome to True Gay Crime, a podcast about queer crimes and criminals. I'm your host, Patrick Marano. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you're listening on YouTube, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, and to tell a friend about True Gay Crime. And if you're able to, supporting on Patreon helps to keep the show alive. The link to my Patreon is in the show notes or in the description on YouTube. As always, the sources for this episode can also be found in the show notes or in the description on YouTube. In today's episode, we continue in the long tradition of California freeway killers. We've covered another freeway killer, William Bonin, in Season 1 of True Gay Crime, so if you missed that episode, make sure to go have a listen after this one. But today, we cover an American serial killer and rapist believed to have murdered and tortured up to 67 men between 1971 and 1983, and who earned himself the nickname the Scorecard Killer. This is the terrifying murder spree of Randy Kraft. True Gay Crime contains coarse language, adult themes, and content that is violent and disturbing. If at any time you feel you need help, please refer to the toll-free crisis lines in the show notes. March 1970, and the sun hangs low in the California sky. The man stares from the boardwalk and out to sea where the sun twinkles off the Pacific Ocean. A seagull squawks in the distance. He notices movement in the periphery of his vision and turns his head to see a young boy walking along the boardwalk. The predator locks eyes on the innocent boy. He's alone, walking aimlessly, easy prey. The wheels are set. There's no turning back. The man approaches the boy with a smile. "Hi, what are you up to?" The boy explains he's run away from home and has nowhere to go. "I have a place you can stay," says the man, even promising sex with an easygoing female neighbor of his. The boy pauses and thinks, then agrees to go with the man to his Belmont Shore apartment. They enter the tidy apartment, and the man offers the boy some wine. Hours later, the man dresses and leaves the apartment for work. The boy comes to, alone, in the apartment. His head hurts, his body hurts, he has cuts and bruises. Panicked, he runs out the front door and into a nearby bar, where shocked patrons call an ambulance. At the hospital, his stomach is pumped, and he tells police he's been drugged and beaten. The boy, 13-year-old Joseph Alvin Fancher, tells police the whole story, everything but the sexual assault. He's too ashamed, and he's afraid no one will believe him. He leads police back to the Belmont Shore apartment, where they find illegal drugs and photos of men having sex, but without a warrant, they can't make an arrest. And Randy Kraft gets away with his first assault, spurring him on to continue his reign of terror. But where does the madness begin? Randy Kraft is born in Long Beach, California on March 19, 1945. He's the fourth child and only son of Opal Lee and Harold Herbert Kraft, a family originally from Wyoming. Being the only son, Kraft is doted on by his mother and three sisters, but his father is rarely around to attend family functions. He's an accident-prone child, breaking his collarbone one year and falling down the stairs, knocking himself out another. In 1948, the family moves to super conservative Westminster in Orange County. The family become active in the Westminster First Presbyterian Church, and his mom becomes chairman of the Deacons Committee. In elementary school, he's noted for his intelligence by teachers, even attending accelerated classes. His mom is part of the PTA. As a teenager, he becomes interested in politics, becomes a staunch Republican, and wants to become a U.S. Senator. He even forms a group with two friends called the Westminster World Affairs Club. At school, he's bright, he's pleasant, he learns the saxophone and dates a couple of girls, even though he knows he's gay, but he decides to keep that information to himself. In 1963, he graduates 10th of 390 students and starts school at the super conservative Claremont Men's College that fall. Because of his parents' influence, Kraft is a conservative, supporting the Vietnam War and campaigning for right-wing presidential candidates, but it's during his second year, where he's away from home, that something starts to happen. He grows out his hair. He grows a mustache. He starts leaning left politically, and he picks up a part-time job bartending at a gay bar in Garden Grove. He starts driving out to Laguna and Huntington Beach for casual sex with hustlers. His roommate at the time notices that Kraft disappears for days on end and comes home in the wee hours of the morning saying, quote, "What he did wasn't something he wanted you to know about." And the rumors start going around school that Kraft is also into bondage. He suffers from migraines and stomach issues and gobbles Valium to ease his suffering. His first tryst with drugs and their effect on the person. To escape the speculation and rumors, he decides to move off of campus with a new roommate in Huntington Beach. In 1966, he propositions an undercover policeman and is arrested for lewd conduct, but he gets off with a first offense warning. By now, he's spending all of his free time drinking beer, doing drugs, playing poker, and hanging out in gay bars, which ultimately stopped him from graduating with the rest of his class, having to repeat a class and graduate 8 months later. By now, he's fully supporting the political left at this time, and he registers as a Democrat and campaigns hard for Robert F. Kennedy in 1968, so much so that he receives a personal letter from Kennedy for his efforts. Kraft, of course, is devastated when Kennedy is assassinated, and 4 months after his graduation, he joins the U.S. Air Force, rising through the ranks to Airman First Class and Supervisor Manager. But when he comes out as gay the next year, his family is shocked. His dad flies into a rage, and his mom, though more understanding, is still very disapproving. Ultimately, though, they would come to terms with it. When he discloses to the Air Force that he's gay, he is granted a general discharge, officially listed as being a medical grounds discharge. He fights the charges, but loses and moves back home with his parents. He's disillusioned. Kraft goes back to civilian life. He starts a diet of speed and beer and resumes his bartending career. It's at this point that Kraft lives at the Belmont Shore apartment and meets 13-year-old Joseph Alvin Fancher from the opening story we heard. As we know, he sexually assaults Fancher, but he gets away with it. The next year, Kraft enrolls briefly at Long Beach State University, where he meets Jeff Graves, a fellow teaching student from Minnesota. The two hit it off, they start dating, and they move in together. Interesting side note, the men actually live together for the next 5 years, during which time 16 known murders take place. Whether or not Jeff Graves knew what Randy Kraft was doing, we'll never know. What we do know is that from this point on, Kraft goes on a murder spree. The body count and brutalness of the crimes is astounding, with his first suspected murder happening around September 20th, 1971. So, here's what we're going to do. Instead of going into the gruesome details of each individual victim, I'm going to lay out Kraft's general MO once, here, right now. So if you don't want to hear the details, you can skip ahead a little bit. But as we move forward, I'm going to name the victims and the general circumstances that they're found, minus the humiliating, dehumanizing details, because I do want to honor the victims. And I find, as I was writing this and doing the research, I found there were so many victims, and repeating the same dehumanizing, horrible circumstances in which their lives were taken from them, I just didn't want to sensationalize this story by going into each detail with each victim. Okay, that being said, Kraft, like so many others, had a style to his murders. First of all of his victims were males between the ages of 13 to 35, many of them part of the U.S. Marine Corps. Their bodies are found with high levels of alcohol and tranquilizers, meaning they were probably unconscious for most of the abuse, thank God. He typically lures his victims into his vehicle, offers them alcohol and drugs. When they're unconscious or unable to resist an attack, they were bound and tortured. Many are found with cigarette lighter burns around their nipples, scrotum, and face. Many are sodomized. Some are emasculated. Others have objects inserted into their rectums like tree branches, socks, or their own genitals. And it's this particular detail that I'm going to omit from the victims to spare them of it: the sodomizing, the emasculating, the objects protruding from their rectums. Death is usually by strangulation, asphyxiation, or bludgeoning. The bodies are then discarded on the side of the freeway, often thrown out of the moving car and found nude or semi-nude. Okay. Now that we have a general idea of the type of torture he would inflict on the victims, the horror begins. Police find the nude body of 30-year-old Long Beach resident Wayne Joseph Duquette discarded on the side of the highway. putrefaction, which is the fifth stage of death, meaning he had advanced decomposition, had destroyed any usable evidence for the police. So they test his blood and they find high blood alcohol levels, and they list the cause of death as acute alcohol poisoning. When police later find Kraft's journal, referred to as his scorecard, the first entry reads stable. Now, Duquette was a bartender at a gay bar called The Stable, and so it's believed that he is Kraft's first victim. December 1972, Edward Daniel Moore, a 20-year-old Marine, leaves the barracks at Camp Pendleton. His body is found beside the 405 freeway by a motorist in the early morning hours. He was pushed from a moving vehicle. An autopsy shows that his ankles and wrists were bound. He was beaten about the head with a blunt object, bitten, and strangled. 6 weeks later, a nude 18-year-old John Doe is found by the Terminal Island Freeway. He's found strangled. The next month, 17-year-old Kevin Clark Bailey is found discarded in Huntington Beach, fully dressed except for his socks and shoes. Another John Doe is found this time dismembered, his body parts in different counties. He had been bound and his body refrigerated before being disposed of. In July of the same year, 20-year-old Ronnie Jean Weeb is found lifeless beside the ramp of the 405 freeway. He had been bound and suspended upside down from a device before the murder. He had bite marks on his stomach and penis. The last victim of 1973 is 23-year-old art student Vincent Cruz Mestas. He's pulled from a ravine in San Bernardino Mountains in December 1973. He is found clothed, but barefoot. His face and head are freshly shaved, and he's missing his hands. There's a 6-month break here where the killing stopped before 20-year-old Malcolm Eugene Little is found in June 1974. His nude body propped up against a mesquite tree near Highway 86. Little was an unemployed truck driver newly arrived from Alabama and looking for work. 3 weeks after that, 18-year-old Roger Dickerson is at a bar in San Clemente when he accepts a ride from Kraft to L.A. His body is found strangled with bite marks and his nude body left near a Laguna Beach golf course. 25-year-old Thomas Paxton Lee, a waiter and part-time hustler, is last seen leaving a bar in Wilmington. Oil field workers find his fully clothed body in Long Beach. He had been strangled. 19-year-old James Dale Reeves decided to go cruising on Thanksgiving in 1974. Police find him nude, except for a bloody t-shirt. Now it's January 1975, and 17-year-old John Laris, who gets a pair of roller skates for Christmas, is anxious to try them out, so he leaves for the Long Beach skating rink. Some beachgoers find him face down in the surf off of Sunset Beach. He was bound, strangled, and had alcohol in his system. Police find 2 sets of footprints in the sand indicating 2 people had carried the body from the parking to the ocean. At this point, there has been some speculation by police that there was more than one person responsible for committing all of these murders, and to complicate things, there is some timeline overlap between Randy Kraft and another highway killer, Patrick Kearney. But 2 weeks later, 21-year-old Craig Victor Yonates is strangled to death near the Golden Sails Hotel in Long Beach near the Pacific Coast Highway. He's barefoot but fully dressed. With 14 victims and bodies discarded in 4 counties, in January 1975, detectives meet in Santa Ana to put together a task force. Officers from Orange County, Imperial, and San Bernardino counties, along with LA, Long Beach, Seal Beach, Irvine, and Huntington Beach. There's an FBI profiler from Quantico, Virginia, a special investigator from the California State Attorney General's office, and a bunch of forensic psychologists. They put a profile together of a man who, quote, desires to be masculine but does not feel masculine, gnawing the nipples and genitals of his prey to symbolically make the victim a female. They describe the killer as, quote, a methodical, organized lust killer of above-average intelligence, believing the work to be done by more than one killer and that one or both must have had military background experience. The victims are all Caucasian with similar physical characteristics, and despite all of the law enforcement people working together, police have no solid suspects, and the murders continue. It's March 1975, and Kraft lures 2 youths into his car in a Long Beach parking lot. The boys are Keith Crotwell and Kent May. They're given beer and Valium as Kraft drives around aimlessly. Once they've both passed out, Kraft returns to the parking lot, but what he doesn't know is that two of Keith and Kent's friends are watching as the distinctive black and white Mustang pulls into the parking lot. Kraft opens the passenger door, leans over, pushes Kent out of the car, and drives away with an unconscious Keith. 2 months later, Keith's skull is found on a jetty close to the Long Beach Marina. Upon hearing the news, the two friends that saw him disappear in the Mustang and who suspect that the owner of the car is a patron of the Belmont Shore gay bar start searching the neighborhood for the car. And can you believe? They find it. Less than 1 mile from their home, they take the license plate number and go to the police. The police, of course, find the car is registered to a one Randy Kraft. When he's brought in and questioned by the police, Kraft spins a tale that goes a little like this. He admits to meeting two young men in the parking lot, offering them beer and Valium while they drove around. He says he returned Kent to the parking lot and continues driving with Keith to a side road close to the El Toro off-ramp where his car got stuck in a ditch. He leaves Keith with the car and walks to the nearest gas station to call a tow truck. When he returns to the car, Keith is gone. Police are unconvinced with the story, but when they go to file a homicide charge, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office declines, saying the coroner believes the death to be an accidental drowning. After being questioned by police, Kraft is spooked, to say the least, and lays low for 6 months, during which time his migraines and stomach pains worsen, and he starts to suffer from insomnia. Perhaps it's the frustration of almost getting caught, but Kraft's next murder is one of the most brutal. On December 31st, he abducts 22-year-old Mark Hall, who's taken to a remote canyon and bound to a tree. He's tortured more than any other victim so far, including burns all over his body with a car lighter and broken bottle slices on his legs. Worst of all, autopsy reports confirm he was alive during most of the ordeal. Not surprisingly, Kraft's relationship with Jeff Graves starts to fall apart. The men have been living together and in a relationship this entire time. But by 1976, the two call it quits, and Kraft immediately starts a new relationship with 19-year-old apprentice baker Jeff Seelig. The two move into a Laguna Hills apartment, where Seelig later tells police that the men are not monogamous during their relationship, with Kraft propositioning hitchhikers to come home with them for a threesome. Seelig tells cops that Kraft was never violent with him and had never seen him act violently towards anyone in general. In December 1976, 19-year-old Paul Joseph Fuchs goes missing, and though his body is never found, the police, who would later be in possession of Kraft's scorecard, which clearly says the name Fuchs, put two and two together. We know from the scorecard that Paul is one of Kraft's victims. That, along with the fact that Paul and Kraft were known to frequent a gay bar called Ripples. Distracted with his new relationship, Kraft takes another break from his killing spree for 16 months, at which points he adds to his MO, and instead of just discarding bodies by the freeways, he now disposes some of them in trash bags. These bags are left in dumpsters and only discovered when the bags tear while being moved. In January of '78, homicide investigators convene, but things are different this time. They know that there's more than one killer involved. They know because another freeway killer, Patrick Kearney, has just confessed to killing 28 young men and boys. His victims are often dissected and discarded in trash bags by the freeway in Southern California. Kearney, though, unlike Kraft, would also use a gun to shoot his victims in the head. Additionally, Kearney wouldn't torture his victims like Kraft did, so even though they have Kearney in custody, they know there is still an unidentified killer on the loose. They know because as Kearney arrives at San Quentin prison, the highway murders continue at an alarming pace. 19-year-old Marine from Camp Pendleton, Scott Michael Hughes, is plied with Valium before being strangled and left beside the 91 freeway ramp in Orange. 2 months later, 23-year-old Roland Gerald Young is released from Orange County Jail. He leaves lockup at 8:19 p.m. and is found dead at 3:30 a.m. in an Irvine gutter. He has alcohol and Valium in his system. He's been bound and stabbed 4 times and thrown from a fast-moving car near the San Diego freeway. 8 days later, and on the day of Roland's funeral, 23-year-old Marine Richard Allen Keith, hitchhiking on his way back to Camp Pendleton from seeing his girlfriend in the city of Carson, is abducted, plied with drugs, bound, and strangled. An off-duty fireman finds his body in southern Orange County. Kraft's scorecard reads only Maureen Carson. 3 weeks later, Washington native 23-year-old hitchhiker Keith Arthur Kleinbiel ingests large amounts of acetaminophen and alcohol. A motorist finds him sprawled across the I-5 in Mission Viejo. Paramedics arrive at 3:30 a.m. to find Keith still alive, but he dies shortly after in hospital. 2 months later, 20-year-old Richard Anthony Crosby is found discarded north of Highway 71 in San Bernardino. He was hitchhiking home after seeing a movie. Then 21-year-old Long Beach truck driver Michael Joseph Inderbeaton is murdered and left on the ramp of the I-605. Kraft takes another break from killing until June 1979 when 20-year-old Marine Donnie Harold Crissell is taken, bound, tortured, and thrown from a moving vehicle onto the 405 highway. He dies from an overdose of drugs and alcohol. Multiple witnesses see his body being pushed from a car, but they can't agree on its identification. 2 months after that, 21-year-old English tourist Keith Anthony Jackson is found discarded in 2 trash bags and a cardboard box behind a gas station. Only his head, torso, and left leg are ever found. Kraft's scorecard reads only England. 2 weeks after that, 19-year-old Gregory Wallace Jolie is found in Lake Arrowhead. His legs and head severed after death. His possessions would later be found in Kraft's home. Then in November 1979, 15-year-old Jeffrey Sayer is waiting at a bus stop in Westminster when he's abducted and murdered by Kraft. 3 months later, 19-year-old Marine Mark Allen Marsh is found near the Templin Highway. He was decapitated after being picked up hitchhiking. At this time, throughout Southern California, gay bars start to post warnings to their customers along with photos of John Doe victims. Who would have suspected that the meek-looking Randy Kraft sitting right next to them at the bar was the culprit? Things are generally going well for Kraft at this point. Not only is he literally getting away with murder, but his work life is on the rise. His employers describe him as a self-starter, an excellent problem solver, and an exceptional employee. Friends of he and his partner remark how both men keep bizarre hours, with Seelig running a bakery and Kraft going for his late-night drives. The couple start counseling to help with their issues. The therapist describes Seelig as defensive and anxious, with an insatiable sex drive. Kraft makes enough through work to buy a house in Long Beach and moves in with Jeff Seelig. The men like to travel, and they go to Mexico, Lake Tahoe, New York City, Key West, and even plan a European vacation, though neither can find the time to get away. It's the summer of 1980, and Kraft travels to Oregon for a business trip, staying in a town close to Portland. While he's there, murders plague the state. 17-year-old Michael Sean O'Fallon, a native of Denver with hopes of seeing the world before starting college in the fall, is hitchhiking across the U.S. and Canada when he gets into a killer's car. He's found along the I-5, hog-tied with near-fatal levels of alcohol and Valium in his blood, having died of strangulation. Kraft's scorecard lists him as Portland, Denver. 17-year-old hitchhiker Michael Dwayne Cluck gets into Kraft's car in Oregon trying to get to California. He's left along the I-5 after being kicked and beaten to death. On the same day the body is found, Kraft visits the hospital for treatment of an injured foot he says he hurt while walking barefoot in his hotel room. Back in California, children play near the El Toro Marine Air Base, where they find the corpse of 19-year-old Marine Robert Wyatt Loggins Jr. discarded in a trash bag. High levels of alcohol and antihistamines are found in his blood, and police would later find photographs of Robert sitting on Kraft's couch in various nude and pornographic poses. Kraft is traveling now a lot for work between California, Oregon, Michigan, and where he goes, murder follows. 17-year-old sex worker Christopher Allen Williams is found in the San Bernardino Mountains with sedatives in his system. In Echo Park, residents complain of a foul smell coming from the Hollywood freeway, and in July 1982, a Caltrans employee finds the decomposing body of a 14-year-old named Raymond David. He's discarded along the Rampart Boulevard off-ramp. Raymond was looking for his lost dog when he was approached by Kraft, who marks the murder on his scorecard as dog. Then, 40 feet away from where they find Raymond's body, the same workers find 16-year-old Robert Avila, who had been reported missing. 4 months later, 24-year-old Arne Mikael Lane is abducted while hitchhiking to Orange County, looking for work, and he's murdered. Then 26-year-old Brian Witcher's semi-nude body is found having been thrown from a moving car along the I-5 in Oregon. Autopsy reveals high levels of alcohol and Valium in his system. Kraft then flies to Grand Rapids, Michigan for work, and while he's staying at the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel, he meets a pair of cousins at the hotel bar, Dennis Alt and Chris Schoenborn. The two are later found murdered, doped with alcohol and Valium, but by the time the bodies are found, Kraft is back in Oregon, where a motorist finds 19-year-old Lance Trenton Taggs, recently come over from Hawaii, dead along the I-5. In December of 1982, 29-year-old carpenter Anthony Jose Silveira goes missing while hitchhiking in Oregon. Kraft is in a state on business, and he drives from Portland to Seattle to visit some friends. During the visit, the friends notice he's wearing a military jacket with the name Silveira embroidered on it. He's taken a trophy from his victim, and he's flaunting it in public. Oregon police notice a pattern in the killings. The bodies are always discarded near mass transportation routes, and they theorize the killer is from another state and only murdered when they're in town on business. So they contact their counterparts in Southern California, where other victims have met a similar fate. In order to narrow down the list of suspects, the Oregon police compile a list of names of people that frequently travel between the two states. Kraft's name appears 18 times on the list. In January 1983, 21-year-old hitchhiker Eric Church is last seen heading from Orange County to Sacramento. He's found along the I-605 with obvious signs of struggle against his restraints. Semen on his body would later match to Kraft. Two young men leave their friend's place in February just after midnight, going to get something to eat. Instead, they get into Kraft's car. 18-year-old Jeffrey Nelson is found alongside an off-ramp close to the Garden Grove Freeway, and 20-year-old Roger Duvall is found the next day, discarded down a mountainside in San Bernardino County. Both had ingested alcohol and propranolol. What happens next? We have to ask, did Kraft get sloppy? Was he overconfident? Did he want to get caught? Because on May 14th, 1983, at 1:10 a.m., a Toyota Celica weaves back and forth down the I-5 in Mission Viejo. Police on duty notice the car driving erratically. They start their sirens and they follow closely behind. The Toyota slows down and the driver's side door slowly opens. A man exits the car holding a beer bottle and he dumps the contents into the road. It's clear to the officers that the man is drunk, and they notice the front of his pants are undone. Officers perform a field sobriety test, which the driver fails miserably, and Randy Kraft is arrested for driving under the influence. But it doesn't end there. The second police officer approaches the Toyota and notices a young man in the passenger seat. He's slumped over, his eyes are closed, and his jacket is thrown over him. There are Moosehead beer bottles and an open prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets strewn about. The officer tries to rouse the man. He shakes his arm to wake him up and feels the cold skin. Alarmed, the police officer looks for a pulse, but 25-year-old Marine Terry Lee Gambrell is dead, with ligature marks around his neck and his jeans unbuttoned. Kraft is immediately charged with driving under the influence of alcohol and taken into custody while detectives thoroughly search the Toyota. In the backseat, they find a belt, perfectly matching the bruising around Terry's neck. There's beer, tranquilizers, various prescription drugs and stimulants. There are bloodstains everywhere, which turn out to be human. Beneath the carpet is 50 photographs of young men in pornographic poses. All of them appear to be asleep or dead. And then, inside the trunk, they find a ring binder with a handwritten list of 61 coded notations. All of this leads investigators to Kraft's home, where they find clothes and personal possessions of young men who have been murdered over the previous decade. But let's examine the scorecard, that ring binder containing the neatly printed terms and phrases, 30 on the left side, 31 on the right. They're Kraft's victims. Each entry refers to a murder or double murder. Some entries are initials, such as EDM, Edward Daniel Moore. Others refer to the torture or mutilation the victims endured, like Marine Head BP. Speaking of Mark March, a Marine found decapitated heading to Buena Park. And yet another entry refers to a place where the body was left, like the Golden Sail, referring to Craig Unitas, who was found at the Golden Sails Hotel. Portland, Hawaii is Lance Taggs. Marine Carson is Richard Keith. New Year's Eve is Mark Hall. There are also a minimum of 4 double murders, GR2 meaning Grand Rapids 2, 2 in 1 Beach, 2 in 1 Hitch, and 2 in 1 MV to PL. All in all, the scorecard shows the possibility of up to 67 victims in total. On May 16, 1983, Kraft is formally charged with the murder of Terry Lee Gambrill, and after investigators speak to over 700 witnesses and gather over 250 physical exhibits, Kraft is formally charged with 16 more murders. On September 8, 1983, Orange County Sheriff Brad Gates holds a press conference to say his men have, quote, been able to establish Randy Kraft's propensity, without a doubt, for sexually deviant behavior that goes back to the 1970 period, end quote. 8 more murder charges are filed against Kraft, 6 in Oregon and 2 in Michigan, but none ever go to trial. Of course, he avoids answering police questions and insists that the scorecard simply refers to his old lovers who are all alive and doing well. Police, however, know better. He was found with a dead body in his car, snapshots of dead men, fingerprints cover the crime scenes, and they have a list that links the murders to him, making Kraft a prolific trophy hunter. When the trial begins on September 26, 1988, the judge bars cameras from being in the courtroom, but he allows spectators. There are almost 160 witnesses called to testify and over 1,000 exhibits introduced into evidence. These include things like bloodstains, hair and finer evidence, fingerprints, negatives and photographs of victims, items of clothing, prescription drugs, a buck knife found in the car, work and travel records, gas receipts that put him in a particular location where victims had been abducted, and personal possessions of some victims he had kept. With such a huge mountain of evidence, the defense tries to make alibis for where Kraft was during each murder, throwing out suggestions of alternate suspects. They try to make him out to be an articulate, hard-working, and upstanding member of the community. The victims, they argued, were victims of someone else. The defense goes on to point that the investigators initially thought that the murders were committed by one or both of the other freeway killers, namely William Bonin or Patrick Kearney. The trial lasts for 13 months and ends up being the most expensive in Orange County history. Closing arguments last for 3 days, with the prosecution calling Kraft, quote, a true scorecard killer, and the jury deliberates for 11 days. Finally, on May 12, 1989, the jury comes back with a verdict of guilty of 16 counts of murder, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of emasculation. Now that he's been found guilty, it was time to sort out the penalty for his offenses. So in June 1989, the same jury reconvenes to hear more testimony from the prosecution and defense in regards to the looming penalty. The prosecution introduces evidence of Kraft's murders in Michigan and Oregon, while the defense dismisses it as highly speculative. And they introduce testimony of a PET scan of Kraft's brain supposedly showing abnormalities in his frontal lobes, which, they say, affect his emotions and impulse. The prosecution are quick to respond and say, quote, there is nothing wrong with Mr. Kraft's mind other than he likes killing for sexual satisfaction. But much to Kraft's dismay, on August 11, 1989, the jury returns with a penalty of death. This is the longest running and most expensive trial in Orange County to date, but the appeals would drag on even longer. For over 13 years, Kraft has been trying to dodge the death penalty. His first appeal claims the gas chamber violates his First Amendment religious tenet by forcing a condemned inmate to, quote, actively participate in his own killing, end quote. But that appeal, of course, is rejected. Here's another interesting twist of the story. DNA evidence from some of Kraft's murders indicate that there was more than one killer involved. For example, moving a 200-pound corpse wouldn't be easy in any situation, but especially throwing them from a moving vehicle that's going 50 miles an hour without compromising the driving is nearly impossible. If you remember, there were also 2 sets of footprints in the sand dragging the body of John Laras on Sunset Beach. Moreover, semen samples are found on one victim that are inconsistent with Kraft's blood type. And the photographs of the victims, which could not have been developed at a commercial store due to the nature of the pictures, had to have been developed somewhere, but Kraft has no darkroom experience or darkroom equipment. So who could this accomplice be? One theory from the prosecution is Kraft's former lover, Jeff Graves. They lived together between 1971 and 1976 when 16 of the known murders were committed. But before police have a chance to question him about the involvement, Jeff Graves dies of AIDS in July 1987. Another potential accomplice is a man named Bob Jackson. In January 2000, Jackson, a small-time criminal, is interviewed by a journalist named Dennis McDougal, who had written a book in 1991 about Kraft called Angel of Darkness. McDougal interviews Jackson, who confesses to murdering 2 hitchhikers with Kraft. Both murders are uncorroborated by local authorities. However, Jackson also tells McDougal that Kraft's scorecard only lists the most memorable murders and that the body count is closer to 100. Police interview Jackson and persuade him to go to a mental institute, and they don't file any murder charges as there's no concrete evidence linking him to the crimes. Speaking of the book, Angel of Darkness, Kraft actually sues McDougal for writing the book, saying it smeared his, quote, good name, portraying him as a, quote, sick and twisted man, and destroyed his prospects for future employment, ruining his chances for appeal. He's looking for $62 million in damages. Of course, the lawsuit is dismissed by the California Supreme Court. Now, here's a creepy side note. Guess who Randy Kraft befriends while in prison on death row? William Bonin. Randy Kraft gets to know William Bonin while he's on death row. What do 2 men like that talk about, I wonder? As of 2024, Kraft remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison. He continues to deny responsibility for any of the homicides he was either convicted of or suspected of committing, as if anybody believes him. And so ends the horrifying reign of terror of serial killer Randy Kraft. So I think it's safe to say, it's pretty clear to us that he obviously did have help. And it's shocking that they weren't able to find enough evidence, DNA, to actually capture somebody. It's impossible, the sheer number of murders, and then, as they stated, the car driving 50 miles an hour, pushing bodies out of cars, 200-pound people moving corpses around. I mean, that kind of carnage is not something that you can do by yourself. And so this is obviously the footprints, the semen samples. It's unfortunate, and now obviously too much time has passed. Nothing's going to happen. Obviously, they even had that one guy, Jackson, admit to some of the murders, and it still didn't stick because there wasn't enough evidence. So we can safely assume at this point that too much time has passed. We are not going to find the accomplices, which is, it's one thing for the crimes to happen and for the person to get caught and then pay the price, but then for people to commit heinous acts like that and not get caught, which I suppose happens all the time, is frustrating and disappointing. A big difference between Kraft and other killers, like, let's say, Jeffrey Dahmer from our last episode, where Jeffrey just completely owned up to everything. Yes, it was me. And there was a sort of an introspective, wondering, why am I evil? Was I born this way? Was I made this way? What made me do this? And there's a kind of like trying to figure out what had made him a monster. Whereas Kraft, to me, is even worse. It's another level because it's complete denial of it's just, I think I'm better than you. I think I'm smarter than you. Yeah, you caught me, but you can't really make it stick. And yeah, you found me guilty, but I'm not going to own up to it because, I got away with it for so long. And you think you won, but I'm not going to own up to what I did, which is, more evil. If there's a scale of evil. And then I wanted to talk about the boyfriends. Which is another unique part of this story, because usually, from the stories that I can remember and the episodes that I've done, I don't remember them dating very much. These were just single men who went to work, which also is like fascinating to me. The fact that you can hold down a job and do this on the side is just insane to me. Just the duplicity of like going to work and facing people and then going home and doing this is just what? But most of them are single, and most of them would go to work and then come home and do this. And then this guy actually was in relationships. Not only relationships, he lived with them. And it sounded like, oh, you know, we would have problems. We go to counseling, like a normal relationship. So the question, I guess, is how much did his partners know? Were they involved? Can you live with someone for so many years under the same roof and not have some kind of idea of what's going on? Did they know? Were they in denial? Did they suspect that? Did they just think that he was cheating? Maybe cheating or going out and, you know, finding sex and coming back. But, you know, did they suspect? Who knows? You know, is it like a mob wife or something where you have an inkling, you know, stuff is going on. It's probably not good. You don't want to know the details, you know, or are they more involved? You know, there's a good case to suggest that his first boyfriend, Jeff Graves, who unfortunately passed away from AIDS before he was able to really be questioned by police, was more involved. We did see William Bonin actually have accomplices as well. I think the freeway killing sort of lends itself more to having accomplices, this sort of nomadic lifestyle, the freeways, the interchanges, on and off, in and out, different places, on the move, and then also, of course, you know, disposing of bodies on the freeways like that. So I do remember William Bonin had several accomplices, which is also interesting. How do you convince somebody that this is a good idea? I think of these people as a bit of like cult leaders, maybe charismatic and you know, the people that they're speaking to are gullible and easy to bring into their sort of web of their murderous web. Anyway, those are my thoughts. If you are listening on YouTube, let me know in the comments what you think of this story. Did he have accomplices? Do you think his accomplices were his partners at the time? Did his partners know about it? Did they turn a blind eye? Did they help? Let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, I will see you in the next episode of True Gay Crime. Did you know you can subscribe, rate, and review True Gay Crime on Apple Podcasts? It would mean everything to me if you did, because it helps me create content you like, and it lets Apple know to share it with more people. Thank you for listening. And remember, always look behind you, lock your doors, tell someone where you're going, and look out for each other.
Why can't we all just get along?